The cabin grew silent as the tall white man pointed at the young black girl in seat 2A. His voice cut through the air like a knife. "You don't belong here," he said. Heads turned. Some passengers frowned in confusion, others in curiosity. The girl didn't move. She sat upright, a slim laptop resting on her lap, her dark braids neatly tied back. Her eyes looked calm, but behind that calmness lived something deeper: hurt, fear, and pride all at once. No one knew this wasn't just any child. She was Ava Johnson, an 11-year-old genius from Chicago. The founder and CEO of Bright Path Learning, an educational app used in schools across dozens of countries. She had built something most adults couldn't even imagine. She had earned this seat first class. Seat 2 AISO, she could prepare for the meeting of her life. But in this moment, none of that mattered. To the stranger towering above her, she was just a little black girl sitting in the wrong place. Her father, Michael Johnson, was several rows behind her in economy. He had insisted Ava take the first-class ticket while he sat in the back. "You need the space to work," he had told her. He believed in keeping her grounded, reminding her that money and titles didn't erase prejudice, but they could shine a light through it. Now Michael craned his neck from row 18, sensing something was wrong at the front of the plane. The man's name was Robert Davis, though Ava didn't know it yet. He wore a sharp gray suit, his leather bag slung over one shoulder, his face tight with irritation. "This is my seat," he said, his voice louder this time. "You need to move." A flight attendant, Kelly Moore, stepped quickly down the aisle. She was young, polite, but her eyes darted nervously between Robert and Ava. "Sir, please, let's check the manifest." "She's a child," Robert said, his jaw stiff. "Children don't fly in 2A. That's my seat." Whispers stirred through the cabin. Some passengers shrugged, others shook their heads. A few pulled out their phones, ready to record. Ava raised her chin. She had been taught never to let anyone push her down, but she was still 11. Her voice came out small, yet steady. "This is my ticket. My name is here, seat 2A. Kelly leaned in to check. She frowned, then tapped her screen. "Yes, sir," she said carefully. "Her name is Johnson, Ava Johnson. Seat 2A is assigned to her." Robert's face tightened. He looked from Kelly to Ava, then back again. "Are you serious? You're telling me an 11-year-old is sitting in first class while grown professionals are in the back? This doesn't make sense." Before the silence grew too heavy, an older woman in first class spoke up. Her name was Helen Scott. She had silver hair, a calm face, and a wisdom that made people listen when she talked. "Sir," she said gently, "take my seat. It's 2C. I'll move to the back." Robert blinked, caught off guard. Helen stood, gathered her small handbag, and quietly walked down the aisle. She ended up next to Michael Johnson in economy, who thanked her softly, without yet knowing how important she would be later. The tension in first class seemed to ease, but the damage had been done. Ava sat still, clutching her laptop. She wanted to focus on her slides graphs of Bright Path's growth, numbers she could recite by memory, but her hands trembled. For the first time that day, she felt small. Robert dropped heavily into his new seat, still muttering under his breath. Kelly hurried away, her face flushed. The passengers shifted, pretending to read newspapers, check emails, or adjust headphones. But their eyes had seen everything. The plane lifted into the air. Michael closed his eyes in row 18, whispering a quiet prayer for strength. Ava pressed her lips tight and opened her laptop again. She had promised herself she would not break, not even here. But the silence in the cabin felt heavy. Every so often, she caught Robert glancing her way. His eyes carried something more than anger. It was doubt. Suspicion. The kind of look she knew too well, one that asked without words, "Do you really belong here?" Hours passed. The flight was smooth until a sudden wave of turbulence shook the cabin. Drinks spilled. A baby cried. Kelly hurried down the aisle to calm nervous passengers. From economy, Nina Brooks, Ava's CLO, rushed forward. She had been reviewing notes with Michael earlier, but now moved quickly to first class, kneeling beside Ava. "Are you okay, boss?" Nina asked gently. Passengers gasped. "Boss?" They stared in disbelief. "A black child? Boss?" Robert stiffened. His eyes narrowed. Ava nodded. "I'm fine. Just checking numbers." The words slipped into the air like truth wrapped in steel. Nina squeezed her shoulder, stood, and returned to her seat. Robert's jaw twitched. His mind spun. If what Nina said was true, this child wasn't just a passenger. She was someone powerful. Someone who threatened his world. As the turbulence faded, Robert leaned back. His face hardened. He pulled out his phone, his fingers tapping fast. His voice was low, but filled with venom. He made an anonymous call to an airline line. Suspicious passenger on board. False identity. Possible fraud. Minutes later, the captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a minor security issue. As a precaution, we are diverting to San Jose." The words dropped like stone into water. Passengers stirred. Confusion. Whispers. Fear. Ava's laptop slipped slightly from her hands. Michael leaned forward from row 18, his body tense. Robert folded his arms, his face cold, as if he had won something. Ava sat frozen, her small shoulders tight, her young face struggling to stay brave. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The flight was about to land, and everything in her life, from her company to her dignity, was about to be tested. The seatbelt light came on as the plane descended toward San Jose. The cabin was tense. Some passengers whispered in low voices. Others tapped nervously at their phones. Nobody understood why the flight was being diverted. But Ava knew something was wrong. She clutched her laptop tight, her small fingers pressing against the cool metal. She looked back down the aisle. Her father, Michael, met her eyes. His face was calm, but his eyes told her everything. Stay strong. Don't be afraid. Robert sat stiff in his seat, pretending to read a magazine. His jaw twitched every few seconds. To him, this was no longer just a seat argument. It was personal. When the plane landed, the captain's voice returned. "Please remain seated. Federal agents will be boarding shortly." Gasps echoed through the cabin. Ava's chest tightened. She was only 11. Why would federal agents be coming for her? Two figures appeared at the front. Agent Sarah Mitchell and Agent Paul Edwards from the FBI. Their dark suits and steady eyes silenced the plane. Sarah's voice was firm but polite. "We need to verify the identity of passenger Ava Johnson." A murmur ran through the passengers. Some leaned forward. Others raised their phones. Michael stood from the back. "I'm her father," he said, his voice steady. "We'll cooperate." Ava rose slowly, her laptop still in hand. Her legs trembled, but she did not cry. Michael moved beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. The walk down the aisle felt endless. Passengers stared, some with pity, some with suspicion. Kelly, the flight attendant, avoided Ava's eyes, shame written across her face. Only one person stood out: Helen Scott, the older woman who had given up her seat. She leaned forward as Ava passed, whispering softly, "Be brave, child. The truth will win." Those words planted themselves in Ava's heart. At the gate, the agents guided Ava and Michael into a black SUV. No one explained much. Robert watched from the window of the plane, his lips pressed in a hard line. To him, it looked like victory. The car ride was silent except for the hum of the engine. Ava leaned against her father. "Daddy, did I do something wrong?" she whispered. Michael pulled her close. "No, baby. You did everything right. Sometimes people fear what they don't understand, but we will prove the truth." At the San Jose FBI field office, they were led to a plain room. White walls, a metal table, 2 chairs. Ava sat across from Sarah and Paul. Her feet dangled above the floor. Paul opened a folder. "Miss Johnson," he said slowly, "there's been an anonymous security tip. It says you may be traveling under a false identity. It also claims your company, Bright Path Learning, is involved in financial irregularities." Michael leaned forward. "That's ridiculous. She is Ava Johnson. She founded Bright Path. She pays taxes. She has audits. Everything is legal." Sarah raised a hand calmly. "We don't make judgments here. We verify. That's our job." Ava opened her laptop. Her voice was small but steady. "I have records, presentations, contracts. Do you want to see?" For a moment, Sarah's stern expression softened. She hadn't expected such composure from a child. "We'll review everything," she said. Hours passed. Papers were reviewed. Questions asked. Dates checked. Every answer Ava gave was sharp and true. But the agents kept circling back to the same point. There have been other minority-founded companies accused of similar issues right before funding rounds. Michael frowned. "Other companies? Which ones?" Sarah sighed. "Several. And most were investigated, then collapsed under the pressure. Someone may be using the system against them." The words struck like lightning. Ava and Michael exchanged a glance. This wasn't just about a seat. This wasn't even just about Ava. This was bigger. Finally, the door opened. A woman in a navy blazer stepped inside. Her voice carried authority. "I'm Emily Brown, legal counsel for Bright Path. I represent Ava and her father." Michael exhaled in relief. Emily spread documents across the table. "Here are full audits, clean financial reports, and signed contracts. Everything proves Bright Path is legitimate. What's happening here is not random, it's a pattern." Sarah leaned back, studying Emily. "What do you mean, a pattern?" Emily's voice hardened. "Each time a black or minority founder prepares for a major funding round, anonymous tips appear. False allegations. Every time, their reputations take a hit. And do you know the one firm that benefits when these startups collapse? Northbridge Capital. They tried to buy Bright Path last year for pennies. Ava refused." Paul rubbed his chin. "That's a strong claim." Emily nodded firmly. "And I intend to prove it." At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Helen Scott stepped inside. Ava blinked in surprise. The kind woman from the plane. Helen carried a folder thicker than Emily's. "I can help," she said softly. Sarah frowned. "And you are?" "Helen Scott, former vice president at Northbridge Capital. I resigned 3 weeks ago." Emily's eyes widened. "You worked for them?" Helen nodded. "And I documented everything. Emails, meeting notes, orders. They've been running a scheme to discredit minority-led startups so Northbridge can buy them cheaply. Ava was their next target. I couldn't stay silent any longer." She placed the folder on the table. "Here's your proof." The room went still. Ava's small hand reached for Michael's. For the first time since the plane, she felt a spark of hope. Sarah and Paul exchanged glances. The weight of Helen's words was heavy. This was no longer a child's ID check. It was a doorway into something much bigger: corporate sabotage, prejudice, and fraud. Michael's voice was low but steady. "So, you see, my daughter is not the problem. The problem is the system that tried to destroy her." Helen looked at Ava with kind eyes. "You're brave, child. Don't let them break you. You have work to do. Important work." That night, Ava sat in a hotel room with her father, Emily, and Helen. She stared at her laptop, her eyes heavy but determined. "Do you think some adventures will still meet with me?" she asked. Emily smiled gently. "Yes." Helen sits on their board now. She'll make sure of it. Michael placed a hand on Ava's shoulder. You've already faced more in one day than most adults do in years. And you're still standing. That's what matters. Ava closed her laptop, whispering to herself, I will not stop. Bright Path is for every child. No one will take that from me. Outside, the city lights of San Jose glowed faintly. Inside, a storm of truth and justice was only beginning. Morning light crept into the San Jose hotel room. Ava sat by the window, her laptop open, her small hands resting on the keyboard. She hadn't slipped much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the man's finger pointing at her in seat 2A, telling her she didn't belong. She saw the faces on the plane, the FBI office, the folders of evidence. But now, she also saw something else. Hope. Helen's words from last night echoed in her mind. You're brave, child. Don't let them break you. Michael stepped into the room with 2 cups of tea. He handed one to Ava and sat beside her. Big day, he said softly. Ava nodded. Today she would stand in front of Summit Ventures, the investors who could decide the future of her company, Bright Path Learning. She was only 11 years old, but this meeting would shape everything. At the same time, across town, Robert Davis sat in a small office at the FDI field office. His face was pale, his hands shaking. He had not slept either. Guilt pressed heavy on him. He remembered Ava's small voice, the calm way she had said, "This is my seat." He remembered Nina calling her boss. And he remembered his own voice on the phone, making that anonymous call that nearly destroyed her. Agent Paul Edwards sat across from him. "Mr. Davis," he said firmly, "you understand the seriousness of filing a false report." Robert lowered his head. "Yes." Paul leaned closer. "So why did you do it?" Robert swallowed hard. Because I was angry. I saw a child, a black child, in first class, and I didn't want to believe she belonged there. But there's more. My company, Future Learn Systems, has ties to Northbridge. They told me if I'd help discredit Bright Path, I'd be rewarded. I thought it was just business, but it wasn't. It was wrong. He slid a folder across the table. These are internal documents, emails, contracts, payments, proof of what Northbridge has been doing. Use them. I don't want to be part of this anymore. Paul studied him carefully. For the first time, Robert looked less like a man full of pride and more like a man broken by his own choices. Back at the hotel, Ava prepared her slides. Her COO, Nina, adjusted charts and graphs while Emily, their lawyer, rehearsed questions. Helen sat quietly in the corner, her silver hair catching the light. She had given up her seat, and now she was giving something even greater, her testimony. "You'll be fine," Helen said, her voice steady. "Just be yourself. You are more than enough." Michael placed a hand on Ava's shoulder. "Remember, baby, this meeting isn't just for Bright Path. It's for every child who will use it. Speak from your heart." Ava nodded, her lips pressed tight. She was nervous, but beneath the nerves lived something stronger. Purpose. At Summit Ventures, the boardroom filled with men and women in sharp suits. They shuffled papers, checked watches, and tapped on tablets. Some of them still wondered if an 11-year-old could really stand before them and lead. The door opened. Ava walked in, her father beside her, followed by Nina, Emily, and Helen. Conversations hushed. All eyes turned. Ava stood at the head of the table. Her voice was small but clear. "Good morning. My name is Ava Johnson. I am the founder and CEO of Bright Path Learning." A few eyebrows rose. A few smiles tugged at the corners of mouths. But Ava pressed on. She clicked her laptop, and slides lit up the screen. She spoke slowly, carefully, explaining how Bright Path worked, an app that turned learning into games, helping children in dozens of countries. She showed numbers, schools, users, growth. She told stories. A boy in Ghana learning math, a girl in Brazil learning English, children in Chicago finding joy in education. Her voice grew stronger with each word. Bright Path is not just about money, she said. It is about giving every child a chance. Children like me, who are told they don't belong, we prove that we do. The room was silent. Not one person tapped their watch now. Not one person shuffled papers. They listened. When she finished, the board chairman leaned forward. "Miss Johnson," he said slowly, "we have heard many pitches, but never like this. Some adventures will fully fund Bright Path's expansion." Ava's eyes filled with tears. Michael closed his eyes, whispering thanks under his breath. Nina squeezed her hand. Helen smiled warmly, proud. That afternoon, Some Adventures released a statement to the press. They declared their full support for Bright Path. They spoke of Ava's brilliance, her mission, and their commitment to stand with her. The news spread fast. Reporters picked it up. Social media buzzed. What had begun as a seat dispute on a plane was now a national story. At the FBI office, Robert's confession and Helen's evidence moved quickly. A task force was formed. Within weeks, Northbridge Capital executives faced indictments for fraud, corporate espionage, and discrimination. 6 months later, in Chicago, a crowd gathered at the Maplewood Innovation Center. Bright Path was launching its Global Access Initiative, bringing adaptive learning to schools in 27 countries. Cameras flashed. Children waved flags. Reporters filled the room. Ava stood on the stage, a microphone in her hand. Her voice was steady, her words simple. 6 months ago, I was told I didn't belong in my seat. Today, I stand in front of you to say every child belongs. Bright Path will make sure of it. The crowd erupted in applause. Michael watched from the front row, his eyes shining with pride. Helen stood beside him, her hands clasped. Robert, now humbled and working to repair his mistakes, sat quietly in the back, ready to testify against Northbridge. Later that evening, Ava walked outside with her father. The Chicago sky was pink with sunset. She looked up at him. "Daddy, do you think people will ever stop doubting us?" Michael knelt to her height, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Baby, people may always doubt, but what matters is what you do in spite of it. You don't let their doubt define you. You let your truth speak louder." Ava smiled faintly, clutching her laptop. She was still a child. She still had dreams. But she had already learned one of life's hardest lessons, that prejudice could try to break her, but her strength, her mission, and her truth would always rise higher. What began as a stolen seat on Flight 2275 had grown into something far bigger. It exposed corruption. It brought justice. And it proved to the world that even the smallest voice could carry power when it spoke for what was right. Dear viewers, what started as a stolen seat on Flight 2275 became a story that shook powerful companies and gave hope to children around the world. Ava Johnson, just 11 years old, showed us that truth can stand even when prejudice tries to push it down. Her courage turned humiliation into victory. Her father's wisdom, Helen's bravery, and even Robert's late confession all proved one thing: justice may bend, but it will not break. But tell me, dear viewers, what lesson do you take from Ava's journey? Do you believe the world will ever change, or must we keep fighting, one story at a time? Comment below and let us know where you're watching from. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so more voices can be heard and more truths can be told. This is not just Ava's story. It is our story. And together, we can make sure every child, no matter their color, is told, yes, you belong.